Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Takeaway Club, where I talk to interesting people across different walks of life to get to know their stories and, more importantly, how they got to where they are, including their motivations, habits, routines, and aspirations, some of which we can apply to our own lives. In today's episode, I speak with a very special guest, Ranjani Krishnakumar, who is a writer, editor, and marketer with nearly 15 years of experience. Ranjani runs M Dash, a content consulting firm in Chennai that specializes in B2B writing. Apart from this, she is also a popular film critic with multiple columns on film, television, and culture for various publications, including Huffington Post and First Post. Ranjani also runs The Whole Works, that's THEWHOLE dot works, a platform for learning about writing, productivity, freelancing, small business management, and work in general. Personally, I had a great time talking to her, hearing about her story, her take on the Indian movie landscape, film critiquing, and all the other amazing things that she does at M Dash. Hi, Ranjani.
Hi,
Great to have you on the podcast. How have you been?
my pleasure. I've been very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I followed your work for quite some time. When I say work, I mean your Twitter profile. So
That's a lot of work.
true, I agree. We have a lot of mutual connections and a lot of people that I admire. They admire the work that you do. So it's finally nice to connect directly, and I hope to learn a lot about your background in movies, business, and writing and all that. So I thought a good place to start would be your journey so far. What have you been up to all these years? Who's Ranjani? What is your story?
I started my career about 12, 13 years ago. I first went to college for a BCom, and I had this, at that point, what seemed like a respectable career was to do a CA and become an accountant. Well, apparently it needed a lot more intelligence than I had at that point. So I did ICWA. I didn't even clear Inter, and then I gave up and I figured I want to do something in journalism, which is when I went to Manipal for a master's in communication. While I was there, we learned quite a bit, as in not just journalism but also filmmaking and film studies and uh, just generally looking at film as a text that impacts society. And I think that's where the film criticism bug bit me. I wrote my master's thesis on Maniratnam's films. I am now embarrassed to admit, but uh, I was young and I was excited about the role of cinema in society more than anything else. And during that time, I read a lot about the Dravidian movement, the Dravidian movement's use of cinema and things like that. It was fascinating. It felt like Tamil cinema had something that no other world cinema has in the way society and cinema is intertwined. Uh, but when you graduate, you realize that writing about films doesn't pay much, and you have bills to pay and a life to live, right? So then I took on PR and marketing. I did that mainstream, and then I wrote about films on the side. Uh, and I also had this urgency to travel. When you're young and then your parents want you married off, you kind of do everything. It feels like life is too short. So then I went to a very nondescript university in the north of Scotland called Aberdeen, where I did an MBA for a year and worked there for another 6 months or so in a retail store selling computers. Uh, just generally sort of learning to live life on my own. Uh, that's that's kind of where I acquired sales skills, lost any sense of shame I had, and was able to build conversations with strangers and sort of just generally ask them questions about uh, I think what sales did for me was made everything less awkward. I'm able to ask questions and have conversation with people without things turning awkward and things like I'm comfortable with awkward pauses. I'm comfortable with awkward answers. I think that's the phase in my life where I developed that. But living in the UK, it's cold. It's also I didn't find a decent enough job there. How long can you keep selling computers, right? So I came back and I was thinking I am going to change the world, and I joined an NGO called Janagraha, where we were going to change the society. Right? I did that for 6 whole months before I realized that I cannot change the bloody world. So then I quit that. I joined the Manipal group. I spent some time with them. So in essence, I came back from the UK and did a lot of marketing, communications kind of work. My boss at Janagraha was also a social media bigwig. So I learned a lot about social media as a way to reach out for brands. This is 10, 12 years ago. So it was quite niche at that point. So that kind of opened doors to a few things. Then I did 1 or 2 jobs and then got fired from a job for incompetence. And I figured maybe full-time work is not for me, so I'm going to freelance. Right? That's kind of how I started in the career that I'm in now. I started off writing all kinds of things. And then slowly over the years, I realized that I have a knack for understanding enterprise technology, which is quite rare. So I kind of stopped writing things about lifestyle and sports and that kind of genres, and niched completely into enterprise tech. And I've been able to grow it into a small organization now. We're 6, 7 people, and we do some good work. Like I said, I've always done films on the side. It doesn't pay enough to even you can't even pay the rent if you want to be a full-time film critic, right? So I continue to do that on the side, and it I don't know, it pays for my appalam, I think.
Amazing. I think that's one of the most interesting introductions that I've had here. Interestingly, a lot of parallels in my short stint as well. So I did BCom and I figured I couldn't tell the difference between assets and liabilities if you put a gun to my head also.
Oh, but you will be surprised to know that I'm actually very, very account savvy now. Like I correct my CA and I am like master GST expert now, simply because when I started running a business, I didn't have a choice but to learn. Like when I was in college, it felt like, what the hell am I doing? Why do I need to know this? But today I can read my books and I can do my taxes, and I'm sort of up to date with all kinds of compliance because I need it now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I think that brings me to the next question. So, media studies, MBA from Aberdeen. Unlike a lot of people, what you do now is actually an extension of what you actually studied for back 10, 12 years ago, which is a surprise these days, right? So, was it that straightforward for you at each of those turns? Usually, because when I wanted to pursue something in media in undergrad, there was this obvious hesitation and reservation on my family's part to go ahead and do that. So what were some of the biggest, or who were some of the biggest influences who helped you take those steps along the way?
Hmm. I don't think my family cared as much about what I studied, mostly because I was probably a woman and they were thinking, she'll just get married and teach or something, right? So, me going to media and communications college, I don't think I really had uh, much protest from home. And they were okay with that. It was expensive at that point, but they were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like you leave us anyway, so might as well pay the college fee, right? So yeah, my influencers in that time. That's a very odd sort of question. There was my thesis guide was a professor called Maya Ranganathan, which she didn't think very much of me at all. Uh, she thought of me as what I thought she thought of me was one of those superficial rich kids who were just trying to pass off the exam. I felt like I worked very, very hard and much harder than my classmates, but I don't think my master's thesis was of her standard, if you will. So there was this phase in which I was constantly working very hard to get to that standard, right? And I think it's also the time that it encouraged me to set much higher standards for myself and not look at it, not look around and say, you know what, I'm probably doing better than the second person, but look at myself and say, am I doing as well as I could be doing? So she probably was a very big influence, more of an influence than I would have admitted at that point, and more of an influence than I think she'll ever know. But yeah, I think she was a big influence. Um, I can't really think of individuals from that long ago who were very influential in my life. Like I said, my boss at Janagraha, Manu Prasad, was a big influence. I think primarily because, like, at that point, I hadn't thought of the potential of social media for brands or anything like that. I was already on Twitter and we were using Orkut and Facebook and things like that, right? But I don't think I really thought of social media as a way for brands to do anything. So in that sense, I think Manu was a great influence to sort of um, let me think of ways in which any kind of media, not just social media at that point, but think of how a lot of internet technologies will be driven by businesses, and to think of internet technologies from the point of view of a business. So that in that sense, Manu was a great influence. I've had several mentors and several seniors who sort of walked me through the freelance journey. You sort of realize. So the one thing that I've seen about my freelance journey is that you don't get it until you make that mistake and then it hits you in the face, right? Like people keep telling you don't do this and don't do that, but only when you make that mistake and that mistake hits you in the face, you're like, oh, face palm, what have I done, right? So in that sense, I've had several mentors who sort of warned me during the journey to do this, do that. But yeah, I lived and I learned. But two people who I believe were like pillars of strength. One, of course, was then boyfriend, now husband, who kind of helped bring this whole freelance as a career into our lives in a way that he helped us as a couple take freelancing seriously without pressurizing regular income. So the way it was that we sort of thought of it as all the regular expenses like rent and groceries and things like that he will take care of, and all the bulk expenses like buying a fridge or traveling I would take care of. So it gave me that freedom not to fuss over month on month income, and if invoices were delayed and things like that, I didn't have to worry. But then in the long run, in a year, for example, it was always necessary for me to have a certain amount of income at the end of the year, have growth year on year and things like that. So I think my husband Umesh was a great influence in building freelancing as a legit career at that point. And of course, my very, very close friend Anjana. So I think of her as this person who helped me overcome self-doubt. So every time I write something and I feel like it's absolute shit, I would just send it to her and she will read through it and say, no, it's fine, send it. Right. She's not an authority in anything, right? I might still get feedback from the client or feedback from the publications editor and things like that. But still there was that, for a regular reader, it's okay. Like what you've written is not absolute bullshit. Kind of validation from her regularly was very helpful. So yeah, quite a few people, I guess.
Awesome. We'll come back to your journey as a freelancer and setting up a small business and scaling it super successfully at a later point in the conversation. So let's talk some movies for now. So because
Okay.
I am truly indebted to you in that way because you have saved me like some good 8 to 10 hours every month, which I wouldn't, spend on shitty movies, thanks to your review at First Post. Um, so, uh, what are some of the movies that have fundamentally changed the way that you thought about something, and seeing this movie, oh, maybe my opinion on this, it's time for an upgrade there, right? So,
So I think the toughest question you can ask a film critic is, what's your favorite film, right? This feels a little bit like that. I think over time, Ranjit's work has been truly humbling. And I think what Ranjit has done is, he's the value he's added to my life, if not anything else, is taught me to shut up and listen. Okay, so there's this film on Netflix called Sir with Tilottama Shome, where she plays a live-in house help who falls in love with her boss. It kind of helped me think about class caste complications, the benevolence of the rich and the privileged, in ways that I wouldn't have thought about before. So that, I think, was an interesting film that kind of changed the way change. I think what the film did for me was it showed class conflict without positioning it as a conflict. So the conflict was a lot internal, and that was an interesting way the film approached it. um Piku is one of my absolute favorite films. I think it kind of it beautifully brings out a grumpy working woman. There's so much about how the Deepika Padukone character Piku just goes about life, and it's, I wouldn't call it slice of life, but there's so much beauty in how she goes about life despite everything that happens to her. I just really like how her grumpiness is normal in the first half of the film. So it's written so beautifully. Like I think I kind of contrast it with the grumpiness of let's say Jyotika and Tambi. She's grunting and she's very. It feels almost unnatural. But Deepika Padukone's Piku is very like it's okay to be a normal grumpy person. So I think that film kind of it changes the way we think about women as characters, right? So that's an interesting film for me. Yeah, just stuff that come off the top of my head. I don't know. Like if I probably have the time to think about it and write, I might think of a whole lot more. But these are the ones that came to me off the top of my head. Yeah, now we'll go back to your second question. Was it pet peeves in Tamil cinema? Is it? Oh, plenty. I don't like the way most women are written at all. Um, it's if you remove the women in the films, there's nothing that'll change because the women were removed from the film. So uh, that's an irritating thing for me. I think in the Tamil industry there's a sense of form over content. So more than ideas, conversations, and discussions, there's a larger focus on the form of cinema. I'm not just talking about stunts and songs and things like that, but generally, there is more focus on the way something's done rather than the meaning of it, uh, from the filmmaking side. So it almost always feels like film critics are reading meaning into stuff that was not intended because the filmmaker is focusing more on form than content. I won't say it's a pet peeve, but that's a conversation I have with myself. That's an internal conversation that happens very often. The fact that there are very few women technicians and fewer of them who are visible is a big problem for me. And I'm not just talking about directors, right? Across the board, like editors and cinematographers and uh, all kinds of technicians, sound designers, could be just about anything, right? I feel like the industry is so heavily populated by men that it kind of already creates a unwelcome environment, if not hostile, for women, which kind of reflects a lot in the movies that we make as well. That's another. I cannot understand all the slut shaming, fat shaming that passes off as comedy. I feel like, especially this generation, the comedy is the pits. There's really little that's truly funny. So yeah, that's another. Is that enough? Is that plenty?
I think that's a pretty good answer. You covered probably so many different facets, right? And quite frankly, I am underqualified to throw in my comment on most of them. But as at least the last one is something that I have a genuine problem as well, right? So growing up um, with the likes of Vivek or Vadivelu in their primes, or even Kaundamani and Sendil and all that, what, like you rightly put, what passes off as comedy these days. And I can't believe that this is the standards that at least Tamil cinema has fallen into, right?
Yeah.
Not
Satish, Suri and all are just impossible.
right. I mean, hope I don't know. Maybe I might bring on Satish or Suri some point of time in the podcast. So I'm going to take the fifth on that one.
Okay.
Just to be honest,
Okay.
it's like one of those things, you know, do you believe in aliens or not? I'm just gonna say I believe, because when they actually come in, I want to let them know that I was on their
You
side.
are a believer. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think again, like I said, I don't watch enough movies to actually critique about it, like the way that you can actually do. But I even for me, someone who hasn't watched a lot in the recent years, the drop in quality is clearly visible, right? So with such terrible writing and direction, and obviously I'm not going to get into any of the specifics here as well, but I have a question for you as a film critic, having watched so many movies and dug in deep into the way it's written, it's directed and all that, have you noticed any common thread uh, across all badly written films? So why is there, it seems like when I watch so many films, it's like how can the director or the writer or even the actor have such a blind spot to when this was actually being made, right? So it's so clearly bad. So do you think there is actually a blind spot there, or it is just a case of, you know, me at an individual being the wrong audience for that particular film?
No, so there are some films that are patently bad and some films that are wrong for the audience, right? Like you take a film like Sivakarthikeyan's Mr. Local, that's just a patently terrible film, right? It's there is no like you might be a Sivakarthikeyan fan and still accept that it's a terrible film. Um, I think there are a few reasons. Like my theories are that there are a few reasons why this happens. One is you have a hero's call sheet and then you just make things as you go along to fill that call sheet, because a lot of Tamil cinema revolves around the hero and their market and their launch date and things like that, right? Like that's kind of even spreading to the OTT these days, because the bigger the hero, the bigger money, say Netflix will be ready to pay for something. So I think one of the key reasons is film starting from I have a hero and then I kind of write for them, instead of I have an idea that I'm going to develop. The next thing might be that a lot of directors kind of fashion themselves as writers as well, and therefore there's compromise on both sides. Perhaps I'm not saying all directors are bad writers, but I'm just saying the uh, cultivating of writing as a separate career and having a writer's room and having a debate over ideas and writing collectively and sort of bringing out a story that means something before you actually go to screen. I feel like that culture does not really exist, and a lot of people just write backwards. A lot of directors write backwards, but that is changing. Like I'm not saying that's universally across all films. Like there are a lot more writers today than there. I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't say that there used to be, but writing as a profession is getting a lot more acceptance these days. And there are even script doctors and everything in Tamil cinema these days. But I think the idea of uh, the writer being sacrosanct is what is missing, and therefore I think uh, there's more trash than anything else. But even in that case, I think, like even in Hollywood and wherever else, right? Korea and Hong Kong and Iran and wherever we think of as like fantastic movies are being made, there will, like Malayalam, for example, there will be trash, right? Like the same Mohanlal who did Drishyam also did Pulimurgan, right? So it's I think we should all come to accept that trash will exist. In my opinion, trash only becomes a problem when it is it's headlined by the biggest of big people, and therefore it kind of uh, it becomes acceptable to invest money into trash, and also for audience to sort of go after trash. So I don't think trash is avoidable, and I think a good amount of trash will exist. But it might be better if there was a lot more focus on writing and values of cinema before we get it to the screen. So there's content that is sorted before we get it to form stage.
Nice. Reminds me of this Kamal dialogue from the Savadaram, right? Now, no trash movies இல்லன்ட்டு சொல்லல. இல்லாம இருந்தா நல்லா இருக்கும்ட்டு.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a nice segue into my next question here as well, right? So I'll play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. So
Mm.
your role as a film critic, the very nature of the job is such that it lacks that skin in the game, right? So what is your mindset going into a job like that, where um, you're basically judging somebody else's work, right? At some level at least. And two, how would you deal this argument, or say if someone comes in and says you are not in the shoes of the filmmaker, so you have not been there and done that. So what would your response to something like that be?
So I'll answer your first question, which was what is your approach to criticism when you don't have skin in the game? I don't think all everybody who comments on something needs to have skin in the game. The way it's understood in, let's say, the startup world, right? For me, skin in the game is the investment. I invest time and I invest energy in understanding your work. Like I follow every film that releases. I follow a wide range of movies and television. I read about movies and television. So the accusation that reviewers don't have skin in the game is a little lopsided, because not all skin in the game needs to be about directing or writing a film. Like my skin in the game is understanding the industry and the landscape and the effect it has in cinema on society, right? So I would say that in fact I have skin in the game. Not just like a film director's skin in the game is probably there that one film at any point in time, or their filmography alone. As a film critic, my skin is in the game of the entire Tamil film industry. And therefore, I believe that every film critic who invests time and energy in watching movies, actively critiquing them, writing essays about them, seeing trends, has more skin in the game than specific filmmakers who make a handful of films through their career. Right? So I won't buy the skin in the game argument at all. My approach to all kinds of film criticism is, especially when I started critiquing individual films. So I was very, very harsh on ideas in movies over a period of time. Like when I write a piece about how cops are represented in the movies, right? My approach to that is quite harsh, quite critical, pointing out the problems with that kind of representation. Because I believe that I represent the voice of those who are impacted by such representation, which is the same with a woman, right? Like if a woman is represented badly, I represent the voice of women who don't want to be represented that way. However, when I critique a film as a whole, I approach it from a point of view of kindness that is owed to a certain filmmaker's creation. So you'll see that when I critique a film, it's a lot less harsh than when I write an essay. Like I don't write something off entirely unless it's truly objectionable, like say Mr. Logan. Like I watched Jagame Tandiram and I thought it was an absolutely tedious and, you know, for lack of a better word, awful film. However, when I critique it, I think it is my responsibility to also point out the parts that work and the parts that could have been could have the opportunity to have, like, the parts that the director could have made work. So I feel like my approach to individual film criticism is from a place of um, I think kindness sort of assumes a certain benevolence, probably from a place of empathy. Like I don't want to write something off. I don't want to say this is entirely trash, don't watch it. But I want to critique in a way that the filmmaker can take something from it.
Do you
Yeah.
feel like it's a thankless job, or it's
No,
it's
I don't feel like it's a thankless job at all. Sorry?
it's very hard for you to get that. I mean, hard might not be the most accurate word. It's a lot difficult for you to win over someone when you are trying to critique a work, right? So no matter what good a job you do, there is always going to be a portion of the people reading that piece who are pissed off at you in some way.
Correct, but that's the nature of the business. No, I don't think of it as thankless at all. In fact, like I think of it as very giving, very generous. Like I've never uh, like I've had people tell me some of it is unreasonable or I disagree with you. But over the last 2 years that I have been professionally critiquing films, I've never gotten any abuse or anything like that at all.
Right.
So I don't think it's a thankless job, especially now. I think people as an audiences are open to understanding film criticism as a legit contribution to the world of cinema in general. What I worry though is there is we live in a world where there are memes and people who mock films, and then there are those of us who kind of take it very, very seriously and think about it academically also. And I feel like I worry often that in the audience's eyes, that might not be a big deal. Like if Ranjani Krishnakumar and Blue Satai Maran kind of come in the same conversation, then that's a bit of a worry for me. Not because one is high or one is low, but we do completely different things. Our approaches and our goals are completely different,
I,
and
I
that's
really see the headlines from this conversation today, right?
what would it be? Ranjani does not want to be Blue Satai Maran, no?
Uh, yeah, I think it's a lot more interesting with you in specific because of the other things that you continue to do with along with film critiquing, right? So we have spent so much time talking about movies from the start of the conversation. Uh, it I probably overlooked the whole fact that you have an entirely different side, different personality and a career to it, right? I'm uh, I'm talking about your stint as uh, a B2B tech writer, starting off as a freelancer and now setting up your own business, right? How do you
It's
go
called
about?
M dash.
Yes, where I had some confusion over the name, which we thankfully got cleared up before we went on the air.
Yes.
So, how do you, as a professional, compartmentalize these two such stark jobs, right?
I don't know if I really compartmentalize. It's easier because films typically release on Fridays. So I work Monday to Thursday on M Dash and then do film reviewing on Fridays. Uh, but otherwise, they're just like, let's say if you think of my work as a large business, then it's just two different verticals, right? I don't need to compartmentalize them. In my mind, it's all writing, and I'm just writing about two completely different things. So I don't know if I really compartmentalize it like that, but the one way in which I uh, separate the two is one pays well and the other doesn't.
Right. But so you have not had an angry client or a potential client, hi, how can you trash my favorite hero's movie like that? So, but
No, no.
we live in a time where things are so reactionary that it's a very legit possibility, right? So,
Yeah,
have you
it is.
felt like you had to draw a line on what you do as a film critic so that it doesn't end up affecting what you do at M Dash?
No, in fact, I believe that if I had a full time job, that would have been a problem. The fact that M Dash is a business of my own, I don't care. Like, let's say a client comes back and says, you know what, you said something about something against Vairamuthu, so we're firing you. I will be like, thank you for making yourself known. I don't want to work with you either, right? And that's possible because it's my own business. Like, there is nobody who gets to tell me that I can say this or I cannot say this because it's my own business. I feel like it's more a privilege and it's powerful and not really something that troubles me at all. Like, I do sometimes worry that things like investigative journalism, which I want to do at some point and write long form, might have an impact on my business. But it's not something I worry about now because these things take time. We'll see.
So, zooming out a little bit, and so what you actually do at M Dash is you write for B2B tech, right? So, as
Yeah.
some coming from the same profession, so I know a thing or two about how companies and businesses what they expect out of a writer, right? I think, in fact, your own caption, I think H1 or H2 on the website is even B2B tech deserves a good story, right? So that's essentially saying, and I believe it's true as well from my experience. So great narratives and storytelling still continues to remain an exception rather than the norm, right? At least in a B2B context, which is very weird because it's the same people who watched good movies, good stories the previous night, and it's them going back to their day jobs the next day. And somehow, for some reason, there is an element of seriousness kicking in the I don't want to call it pretense, but in the name of professionalism, right? And even within B2B, uh, there are different levels to it. For example, if you're at an SMB company, you have a lot more freedom and creativity to do right things on in your own way. When you go to enterprise, it's like, oh no, no, you can't do that. We are enterprise. You have to be super serious about that. So, what is your take on this? Why do you think that we are at a state where you have to say even B2B tech deserves a good story?
The reason I said even B2B tech deserves a good story is that people don't think of tech as storytelling at all. Tech writing is typically seen as technical writing, which is typically documentation about a particular product and things like that. So when the reason I put even B2B tech deserves a good story on my website was to tell people that we tell stories about technology, which means we are marketing writers for technology and not technical writers.
Right.
It's that positioning that I wanted to take, which is why that tagline comes. But if your larger point is why don't people write good stories, I think it's because very few know how to do it well. It came as a surprise to me when I started hiring, but very few are able to write great stories, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair point. So I have been forever trying to hire someone who can write good stories, and it has been an endless search for that. And I want to spend even more time talking about your career and how you have managed to scale your business, right? Starting out as a freelancer, and I'm not sure how correct I am about this, but I think culturally, I don't know a lot of people in Chennai who actually do this, right? So there are a lot of freelancers, but very few who actually go on to take that next step and setting up a proper business and doing things like that. So feel free to correct me if I am wrong here. But what were some of the my uh, milestones, or perhaps what were some signs that said you're ready for this, for you to take that leap from just being a freelancer who used to work with clients to actually going on and setting up your own business and managing a team of individuals and all that?
I still don't think I am ready. I still feel like, oh my God, was this all a big mistake? So I don't think I'll ever feel like I'm ready to scale this business.
Looking at your LinkedIn endorsements, I think it's safe to say that you have made the right decision.
Thank you. And I also, right, so about milestones, right? So the first time I realized that to grow this business was when I started getting inquiries that I was able to handle on my own. In essence, I realized that there's so much opportunity in doing what we do. There's money to be made, and I want to be the one to make it. What then ended up happening was I worked years, 7 days a week without taking a day's break, just to sort of grab all the money that's out there possible. And it was still falling all over, right? Like there's still more opportunity and not enough time for me to do it. So it felt like the one thing is there is opportunity and I'm able to do something well. And I want to see if I can get other people to do the same thing well. And the second thing is, uh, as a freelancer, your so one, there's only so much you can do. So your growth is limited by how much you can do. And when you start increasing your price to define the growth, then you will end up having to do a different kind of work, right? I can charge, let's say 10 rupees, 15 rupees, 25 rupees a word. But let's say 10 years from now, if I want to charge 50 rupees a word, then that needs to deliver 50 rupees worth of value to the customer, which then it becomes very difficult just as a writer. So for me, the natural model that helped get to this stage was to set it up as an agency and do it at scale. So the first thing I realized, the first time I realized I wanted to scale was when I realized there's a lot more money in it. The next point was that I'm not getting enough of a break. And when I take a break, the business halts. Like if I'm going on a leave for 2 weeks, then no money gets made for those 2 weeks. And I wanted to get to a place where I can take a break and continue to make money. So that's another moment when I realized I needed to scale. And actually, I don't know how to say this humbly, but I still have customers who say, I have a lot more work for you. Hire 2 more people and train them. I will send work your way. And I think it's that faith and relationship that you build with customers who tell you, you know what, you can do. Like, we ourselves have more work for you. So uh, grow your system kind of thing, is another reason why I thought, okay, let's try this out. But I wouldn't think of myself as I don't think I've scaled the business, as in we're still only 6 people, and we're still 6 or 7 people. We're still struggling to sort of get to a system where I don't have to see or edit every piece that goes out of the business. Replicating a freelancer model, which is delivering very high value in an agency model, has its own set of challenges. Like, I can't hire a fresher and expect them to write the standard at which I would write, which would mean that I will continue to remain the bottleneck. And a lot of and when I moved my business from freelancer to agency, the pricing had to change, but customers know me as a freelancer paying a certain price. So their willingness to pay a higher price would be low, which means I will have to find new customers who are willing to pay a certain price and then reposition all over again. So it comes with its own bunch of challenges, but I think there was opportunity in what I was doing, and I wanted it. I wanted all of it.
That's an interesting point, right? So a lot of people, especially given you start out as a freelancer, after you set up the agency, a lot of them is coming for Ranjani, the writer, right? So
Yeah.
how do you ensure that the entire company kind of has that same flavor or style to the writing, or how do you ensure that it gets trickled down from you to the rest of the team? Or does
I haven't the darndest clue. I don't know. I try every day. I tell people all the tricks I use. I try to teach people how I make things happen the way I make things happen. But I haven't been able to succeed at all. So I haven't the darndest clue. I'm still figuring it out.
right? Uh,
Sorry.
I don't know. I think I just expected. I was
Uh,
wonder-
like a profound answer about how I make it happen. No, I don't. I just sit and edit everything and I send to the client.
right. Yeah, fair enough. So I appreciate the candidness in that answer. Right. Uh, so I think that kind of wraps up the first half of the conversation, which was a lot fun for me. So it's been a long time since I had such a free flowing conversation, or one where I talked in Tamil in between and all that. So um, I think that pretty much sums up your personality, that you brought that out in me in the episode. I think with that we'll go to the last section, which I like to call the random deck. So, which is basically me asking shorter questions. So, I
Okay.
like to
Is
go.
this the rapid fire round of the takeaway podcast?
Yes, exactly. So this is to kind of make up for all the other monologues that I go on in the previous part. But you can feel free to give long answers. I'm just gonna keep it.
Like, you feel free to monologue. I will keep quiet.
That's the idea of bringing you on. I'm gonna be talking in every episode, so I want to keep the part I talk to a bare minimum in every episode possible. First one. So, what is your favorite word in English?
Aforementioned.
Okay.
I just love the sound of it. I think it has a very quirky. It's old age. It's not a modern word, but it kind of brings a certain quirk to what we're talking about, and I think it's it's less accusatory than as mentioned earlier.
Can
There's
you?
a certain
Is
yeah.
I?
Okay, let's say I'm writing writing an article about let's say Dhanush not appearing as involved in Jagame Tandiram, than in any other film, right? So I would write a sentence later in the review that says, this might also be a result of Dhanush's aforementioned aloofness.
Right.
So it kind of brings that like it's a little sarcastic, but not really. It's quirky, it's old age. It's I think it's a nice word.
I am not sure how much of this actually makes sense for you as a person, but if you had to go back to your 17-year-old and give some advice on things you would have done differently, what would you have done or said to your 17-year-old self?
Seven. I would have told them not everybody will like you, and that's okay.
Right.
I think I spent a lot of my young self, like a lot of my teens, trying to get everybody to like me. Of course, I spend a lot of time even today trying to get everybody to like me. But the the idea that people will not like me did not occur to me then. It felt a little bit like it's unfair when someone doesn't like me. And I think I would tell them, no, it's not unfair. It's just that's the way the world works. It's okay if people don't like you.
Okay, next one. What is a good habit that you're trying to work into your life and a bad habit that you're trying to get rid of?
Good habit is exercise. I'm failing miserably. Bad habit is working in bed, which I'm kind of making progress on.
Right. Okay, I didn't know that was actually bad.
No, but see what happens when you work in bed is that you wake up, you pull out the laptop from your side table, and then you start working. And then you kind of bring one chips packet and you start eating, and then you bring one coffee and then you start drinking. And by the time it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then you just pop your laptop back on the side table and go to bed, right? It's
Okay. Did you speak to my mother before this episode?
no, I didn't. I think that's just what all of us do. Especially after the pandemic, I've always worked from home, but especially after the pandemic, there is a loss of a sense of time for me. So I want to like I now I have a table and a chair and a whiteboard and everything. So I try to sit there and do the work all the time. And also, our house is arranged in such a way that the bed is in front of the TV, but the table's on the side. And I like, especially when I'm writing, I like playing some kuppapadam in the background to sort of reduce that gloomy loneliness in writing. And therefore, I end up sitting on the bed because it's in front of the TV. I'm trying to sort of reduce that and focus on my writing uh, uh, without reaching to the TV as a desperate measure.
So, what is a book that is your absolute favorite? Something if you had to give to everyone in your network that you do.
So I typically gift things to people that I think they will enjoy. But a few books that I have gifted in the past, there is Venita Coelho's collection of feminist ghost stories called Washer of the Dead, which I've gifted to several people. I think it's a fantastic interpretation of uh, ghosts as a concept. Then I have also gifted Ambai's In a Forest, a Deer, which is a collection of short stories, feminist short stories. That's something I've gifted. I remember gifting The Reluctant Fundamentalist to a lot of people at one point. But it's very strange that about 10 years later, I haven't any memory of that book. Like, I don't even know what happens. And I've tried to go on Wikipedia and try to recollect, and it's like completely washed away from my memory. So I don't know. Maybe I've grown out of it. Maybe I should read it again. So that's a book I've given a lot of people. Nivedita Menon's How to Be a Feminist has also been a book that I've gifted people. I think it places feminism as something that impacts everyday life and not just as an ideology. It kind of informed quite a bit of my growth as a feminist. It does it does have its problems of intersectionality, but it was a good introduction to what we were looking to do. What else? I think I recently gifted. So at M Dash, we I urge everybody who joins to read 3 books. One is Radical Candor, which is a way to sort of get used to me giving feedback. The other is On Writing Well by William Zinsser, which I think is a fantastic book on narrative nonfiction. And the third is Michael Hyatt's Best Year Ever. I think it helps plan our year very well. So those are the books that we kind of read professionally. What else? I read a lot of. You have
Both Radical Candor
and On Writing Well. Yeah, they're very good books for the kind of work that we do.
A funny story behind Radical Candor. This I asked my first boss to buy this book in like first 6 months into the job, where the prospect of becoming a manager was like 2 years away for me. But still, I just went ahead and read this one. Nice.
Yeah. No, it's not like at M Dash, it's not just about being a manager, right? Like everybody needs to learn to give feedback. So yeah, I see why. What else? What else have I gifted people? That's a good list, no?
That's a pretty good list. So
Yeah.
usually
Yeah, I just realized I'm a lot more comfortable talking about books than I am movies, huh?
so time to
Yeah.
make a transition into book review.
No, I don't read enough for that. Like I watch a lot of movies, but I don't read enough for that.
Right. So next one. So who is someone in your network? Someone that you know thinks deep or is a great conversation holder, who would make for a great guest on the show here. Now that you have been here and know what to expect.
Sandhya Menon, perhaps? Restless Quilt?
Right. So you will be surprised at how ignorant I am things that has not got to do with SaaS or technology.
Yeah. No, she works at a tech company as well, I think now. She does PR and communications. Have you spoken to Karthik Srinivasan, Beast of Troll?
Funny story there. Actually, I think Karthik is from Srirangam, which is where I am from. So we have that connection there. And I love advertising and copywriting. So I have followed him on LinkedIn for 1 or 2 years now. Uh, Actually, about a year or so back, I sent out a tweet saying, "Hey, if there is anyone in Karthik's network, I'd love if you can connect us so I can have."
Yeah, I can connect you if you want.
Thank you. And I think my last one of as part of research, I actually went through your interview with Karthik as well. Yes,
Yeah, I can connect you if you want.
it's very kind of you.
Yep.
Okay, so the last one, we heard what you do if you went back to 17. So, what do you want to be known for when you're 80?
I want to be known for writing insightful pieces about Tamil cinema. Like that is the legacy that I want to leave behind. I don't know how much of it I'm doing so far, but it's something that I want to do through my life and sort of leave behind as a legacy. I also want to grow M Dash into a small, sustainable, closely knit, purpose driven sounds a little startup-y, but a job that gives meaning to multiple people, not just something I go in the morning, come back in the evening and do some work, but sort of build it as an organization that helps people find some kind of meaning at work. That's something I want to do. But I also want to teach a lot of people about the things I do, how I do. I think Wholeworks is what I want to spend a lot more time with. I want to build that into a place where people can learn how to navigate the professional world in a way that we're all not taught. Like a lot of people don't know that you don't have to accept the first offer. You can negotiate. A lot of people don't know how to write CVs, how to write cover letters, how to walk away from situations that don't work for you. I want to build the whole works into a place where uh, I can teach young people navigate the professional environment.
Amazing. And I just wish you all the luck in the world to actually go on to do the things that you have said, right? And I have been really inspired by the kind of work you have put out. And I'm personally thankful for the number of hours you have saved me. And yeah, I think in general you are this zesty, full of life character that it was very nice talking to you. So I'm glad we did this.
Thank you.
So we'll before we wrap up. If people want to reach out to you, where can they do that?
If you're on Twitter, then underscore Tarkuri, THARKURI is where I am. That's the place I hang out quite a bit. But you can also find me at thewhole.works. That is THEWHOLE.WORKS.
Awesome. Thank you, Ranjini, for taking the time. I had a great time talking to you.
My
And
pleasure.
good luck. Have a good week, good year ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.